It is the Brink, your favoritist podcast. Maybe. Let's be honest, there's at least 87,000 better podcasts out there, but we'll take the mantle of being the 87,001st best podcast that you know or love or listen to or all of the above. But we're excited to be back for a Monday episode of the podcast. Not a Sunday episode, a Monday episode. It's a bit weird, but there's reasons behind that and nothing exciting to really share for that. Let's just say recording schedules got changed and we're here on a Monday instead. But it's actually a bit of a different episode in general too, because we were hoping to bring a few more people back to the fray here, Josh and the likes, but again, scheduling all got a bit skew-if, and we're here to bring you a somewhat shortened episode, so to speak. So on the show today, you're going to hear from Mr. Knockchester in New Zealand. We're going to be talking a little bit about Women's World Cup. And speaking about the Women's World Cup, Jimmy Kurniawan, who hasn't been on this show in several years, but he and I went to several Women's World Cup matches over the last month or so. And we've got a little bit of a clip to play with him and I that you're going to hear very, very shortly, as well as a best of clip to get to throughout this. But I wanted to touch on one thing, because next year in the history of this show will be 20 years, essentially, since we began in some form or another. Back when we were still EC schoolies and JAB schoolies, 2004 was that year. So it's technically 20 years this year that we're on air. But recently, I recorded my 4,000th episode of either podcast or radio, which, of course, you've been on the journey with me all that time. But just wanted to take that opportunity to thank everyone who has maybe been with us along this very long journey. And we realize that maybe there's only one or two of you that regularly listen to this show. And we realize we're no Joe Rogan, but the people that do tune in, I appreciate you. Just want to share that with you. Share the love. Share the love out there and the passion that we have for the very few people that have stuck with us across this journey over the years. So if you're listening to this, you've been with us since the beginning, or even a large portion of the last 20 or so years, let us know. We'd like to hear from you, because we like hearing from people. It's fun. It's nice. And you would listen for a reason. Maybe you're just bored. I don't know. Maybe you're just like, hey, that Brink's on. Going to listen to that. But if that's your reason, good enough for me. So I'll take that. But I wanted to take a brief opportunity to at least send that message out there too, because we've got some exciting things coming. A lot of exciting things coming your way from this program. Next year's going to be a big year for the Brink, a 20th year on the air in some form or another. But there's going to be Brink Unleashed are going to return next year as well. Haven't had a Brink Unleashed done in about 4 or 5 years, so that's going to be back next year, and some celebratory things done for that as well. So if you're a fan of my voice and the Brink in general, well, you're going to have a good time in the coming weeks, months, and years. And on this episode too, because I'm going to make a sound play, and you're going to come back, and you're going to hear from Jim. It's been a very long time since we've had our next guest here on the Brink. I do very much remember recording an audio segment with him in this very stadium about 7 years ago on a very memorable day. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's see if I can actually, for once, pronounce his surname. It's Jimmy Kurniawan. Jimmy K. How do I say it, Jimmy?
It's Jimmy Kurniawan, and I'm glad to be back, Ben.
Okay, I got there very, very close there. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show, Jimmy. We are sitting right now in what is now known as a core stadium. We were here in 2016 on NRL Grand Final Day to see the Sharks win their only premiership. Great day. What was the stadium called? Was that still Telstra Stadium back then?
I think it was called Allianz. No. Yeah.
ANZ.
ANZ, that's
ANZ
it.
Stadium.
That's it, yeah. I'm just getting old, Ben, so my memory's not that great.
Well, I went back to Telstra Stadium. That was even before ANZ Stadium. But we're here at State of Origin, Game 3. It's half-time right now. New South Wales are leading Queensland. It's exciting to be here with you, Jimmy. You're obviously supporting the blue team. I'm supporting the maroon team. How have you found the first half right now? Obviously a bit of a better first half for you.
Yeah, it's been going great at the moment. New South Wales scored some great tries, leading 18-10, but in these State of Origin games, it goes up to the last second, so you never know, because Queensland's a pretty good team.
It's always an amazing atmosphere at these games. Obviously, this is a dead rubber. Queensland have already won. But, I mean, there's at least 60, 70,000 people here. Not quite as full if it was a decider, but, I mean, the New South Wales fans have turned out in droves, and it's a great atmosphere.
Yeah, it is a great atmosphere. I know this is your first game. What do you think about it, Ben?
My first one in New South Wales, Jimmy. I went to one in Queensland, of course. But Yeah, I mean, similar to that. It was the opposite in Brisbane. It was a game 3 that New South Wales had already won the series, so it was a dead rubber, but there was 55,000 Queenslanders, great atmosphere, one of the best atmospheres I've ever been to a sporting game, and I mean, it's on the same level. I mean, those New South Wales chants are pretty epic, and I'm pretty impressed that you guys have shown up when you guys... I mean, your team hasn't showed up for the first 2 games, so I think it's good that the fans have at least shown up, right?
Yeah, it's a bit first 2 games were a bit disappointing. But, hopefully we'll win this game and, it won't be a clean sweep by the Queenslanders.
Now, you and I will be here next week and also a couple of times over the next month for the Women's World Cup. How are you feeling about that? Ireland, Australia, in a week's time at the time of recording this, 80,000 people for the opening game in Australia at least of a World Cup in this very country.
Oh, yeah, I'm pumped. I can't wait. It should be a great tournament, and hopefully most of the Australians will come out and support it.
Are you thinking that the Matildas will go deep? How are you feeling about the World Cup for the Matildas?
I'm hoping they'll probably get to the quarters, but I don't know, because my favourite probably England or the USA, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about this England love, Jimmy. I'm not too sure about that. But you also got a few tickets to some of the other games with me as well. I'm very intrigued. Now, we might do a recording at the game next week, but Colombia, South Korea. Now, I don't know if you ever thought one day I'm going to go see a World Cup match between Colombia and South Korea at midday on a Tuesday.
I know it's a bit strange, but just come out and support the tournament. There's a few games on in Sydney, so may as well come and just get in with the atmosphere.
11 games, I believe, in Sydney, which is pretty exciting. You've also got, round of 16, quarterfinals, semi-finals. Are you going to keep jumping on the resale site to see if you can get a final ticket at all?
I'm hoping, just fingers crossed.
Well, I recommend it because having missed out on one of the games, I finally snuck on there and got a ticket to the England-Denmark game, so that was good. I feel we're going to get decapitated here because there seems to be a trend of throwing these Go New South Wales signs down far into paper aeroplanes, which I got whacked in the head at the NBL finals of one of those. So they are quite... Have you ever been hit in the head? You nearly got hit in the head there a second ago.
Almost, but didn't you get hit in the head with a beer at the soccer a couple of months ago?
I did. I was with you and Phil. That's right. The Cove threw a beer at me because I was sitting there in a Pacific FC jersey cheering for the Wanderers. Go figure. But you guys are rabble, right? The bloody Sydney FC fans. Are you going to hold on and New South Wales going to win this?
I hope so. Yeah.
All right.
We've got to keep the faith.
Well, I say no, boo, but let's hope it just is a good second half. Thanks for joining us on the show. It's good to have you back.
No worries. Go the Blues.
We always like to cross the ditch to find out what is happening in that part of the world by also getting this exciting sound playing at the same time because it's Nick Chester. Nick, welcome back to The Brink.
Thanks. I hope you went and stood in a paddock and put the microphone up to those sheep and got their opinion.
That actually was when I was living in New Zealand. One time I visited a brothel. So just thought I always like to keep that sound as a good old memory. We were reminiscing, Nick, off air about living in New Zealand. Well, you still do. I'm sorry about that. But, that one time. You remember when I actually came there, that like week that I spent and we had that lovely little... trip to around the North Island. We did the Sky Tower and all the fun bits of the fair of New Zealand. I enjoyed that little trip.
Yeah, I think, did we do like Waitomo Caves or something like that as well?
We did,
Yeah, did a few fun things.
Yeah, and I remember we drove quite around a bit and then we Hamilton Gardens, which I really enjoyed, and then... Yeah, no, I enjoyed that little visit, and we did the golf in the middle of the lake. Was that Rotorua?
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's Taupo. Yeah,
that was Taupo, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, and that weird guy at that brewery who was wouldn't shut up about his beer.
It was like two of us there, wasn't it, for a brewery tour?
Yeah.
And it was
yeah.
Yep. Okay, that was fun. God, that was 7 years ago, Nick. That was 7 years ago. Wow, look at that. We're not here to reminisce. We're here to talk about serious stuff like World Cups, because that's what we talked about last time, but it's happened since, because the Women's World Cup, this seems to be like the Women's World Cup wrap-up edition of the Brink with everything that's sort of happened. It's been a while since we've been on air, but the New Zealand perspective, because I know when we last spoke, I think you kind of touched on that maybe the vibes weren't as big as they were here in Australia and ticket sales were a little bit worrying and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, you guys shattered in. Didn't you break, I think, the record for biggest football attendance ever in your country about 7 different times? And I think the top 3 didn't even involve New Zealand. So obviously it was quite successful in your end of the ditch. But give us your viewpoint of it, Nick, because you also ended up going to a game too.
Yeah, I think it's typical New Zealanders. Like we're slack at getting on board with stuff until it's actually happening. And then we kind of just jump on boots and all and get really into it. And it certainly helped with the football ferns winning the opening game. It was crazy to think, like, it feels like, like months ago now, but it wasn't that long ago. But that was like, we had that kind of like downtown shooting in Auckland the same day. I don't know if you remember that.
Right.
But
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was like this kind of quite somber start to the World Cup, and then the Kiwis had played their best game first and got everyone really excited, and then it all kind of went downhill from there for the football ferns. But I think kind of it got everybody kind of in the right frame of mind, and from there I think people would like just genuinely got excited. And it wasn't even just for the football ferns. I think it was just having this event in your own backyard. People kind of got quite excited by it. And yeah, I think an interesting experience for me personally, because I live in a town that wasn't a host city. So it was kind of like, this is happening, but it's kind of not really happening for me. And then I obviously went to a game. I went to the Sweden versus Argentina game in Hamilton. You kind of drive into this town where it's actually happening, and there's, the flags are up, and there's a real buzz about the city, and Hamilton's quite a big like migrant town as well. Like lots of migrants and refugees live in Hamilton, so you got a real kind of melting pot living in that city as well, and so you could just feel that vibe there. And then I've had a couple of work trips to Wellington, and the first one was towards the kind of knockout phases of the World Cup, and so obviously there were still games happening in Wellington as well. So I've actually been able to be in two cities that were host cities while the event was going on, and yeah, definitely a real big buzz. And I think it's probably a real kind of testament to Kiwis that we stayed with it even after our team got knocked out early, because often I think that's the way of like, yeah, you're excited while your team's in it and then kind of fades away when they're gone. But we did kind of stick with it, and yeah, there was lots of really cool stuff happening. So yeah, it was great.
That first game was incredible, I think, in the perspective over here, because I was at Stadium Australia sort of ahead of the Australia-Ireland game while your game was on, and there's a bar right next to the Olympic Stadium, and they sort of had it on a big screen kind of that people could see on the outside, and there was, a significant crowd sort of getting ready for the Australia-Ireland game there, having a drink, some food, watching it. And when New Zealand scored that goal outside the stadium, everybody went off. Like, no word of a lie, Australians, I think that's the loudest I've ever heard Australians cheer for New Zealand ever. And just everybody was going crazy. And we got talking to this one woman who was a Kiwi woman. She was probably like in her mid to late 50s. And she had bought a ticket for a month to travel around Australia to watch all these games. She'd been playing soccer her entire life. And she was in tears. And there was still like half a game to go. I think you guys scored that goal, didn't you, at the end of the first half. So it wasn't like, that was a last minute winner. But just that I think from that moment on kind of set the tone for what that month was going to be. And I loved seeing that. And because everyone in Australia was then cheering for the football ferns to go well. That game against the Philippines, we were cheering. And then obviously ultimately that draw against the ever boring Swiss. But, I think it was great then to see everybody in your country get behind all those other games. To still get 43,000 people at quarterfinals, semifinals, and as you said, games without New Zealand. It really was sort of special to see that from you guys.
Yeah, it was tough with the whole football ferns thing, because they set themselves up to kind of just get into those playoffs within 2 games. Like, they never should have lost to the Philippines. And actually, as it turns out, if they'd even drawn that game and the rest of the results stay the same, that they would have gone through. So yeah, I think it was just I'd never really expected them to beat either Norway or Switzerland. But obviously they put themselves in a great position with that first game. And I think if they'd just gone through and won that game against the Philippines like they should have done, and they actually played really well in that game, they just couldn't quite find the goal. And the goal that got scored against them was this bizarre kind of like really close range, like got hit basically straight at the keeper, and she kind of like almost like bounced off her and
you were
like, into the
offside by
goal.
like a millimeter, weren't you? You had a goal disallowed as well.
Yeah, it was pretty tough. But I mean, at the end of the day, like if your team only scores one goal in 3 games, they're not going to get out of the group. And so I think that's where we kind of let ourselves down. We just didn't score goals. And you don't get very far in this tournament if you don't score goals. So, yeah, I think it was really cool. I mean, the game I went to, I think, was after New Zealand had been knocked out, and there was still a massive buzz about the place. It was still, everybody was really into it, and there was a good crowd for that game, considering it was kind of like the game I went to was a bit of a dead rubber. Like Sweden had already qualified for the knockout, and I think Argentina were already out, so there was like nothing on the line, and there was still like really great crowd. Like the Argentina fans were just like banging drums the whole time. I had this really loud, and I mean that in a nice way, this really loud and into it kind of Swedish woman behind me was like yelling in Swedish the whole time. It was great. I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, I was going to ask that about the Argentinian crowd, because the best game I went to, and not just because it featured Germany, was Germany-Colombia, and that's mainly down to the Colombian fans. I went to 3 Colombian games, and my Lord, they are incredible fans. And so many people here in Sydney kept saying that the best game they went to too was Germany-Colombia, because the atmosphere at that game was incredible. I mean, I went to 5 England games, and I've got to say, England disappointed me the most in terms of just their fans actually not being like how you think they are. A Dutch game, which outside the stadium, the Dutch fans were absolutely insane, but did not bring that into the stadium. It's like they left it outside and just didn't bother bringing it in. But the Colombians, every time. The Germans, I mean, I loved all of that. But the South Americans, I heard a lot of people say that they went to, say, Brazilian games. They were the best games they went to, featuring Brazil. So it's obviously that South America one. So I'm glad to hear that the Argentinians, even though they were eliminated, and obviously their women's team not quite up there with their men's, but still obviously brought a lot of atmosphere.
Yeah, I think it's probably the way that people kind of take in their sports. I'm quite surprised saying that about England, and I do wonder if there was just like almost like this air of expectation with the England team, so there wasn't really a huge kind of atmosphere behind them. I don't know, but like I don't know if you've been to England cricket game probably.
Yeah, I mean I've been
Ashes
to
and stuff.
We had an Ashes in Hobart, and obviously a smaller crowd one days, but you get Barmy Army. Even Hobart, they wouldn't send them. You'd get a little pocket, and you'd have that chanting and that English style, which I was expecting in a football game. It just wasn't there.
Yeah, I remember I went to a New Zealand-England test match in Hamilton, and same thing. It was like day one of the test match, and it was just insane. Like the Barmy Army were right into it. And so it's interesting because I think probably the English men's football fans are probably more into it. And I do wonder if there's something comes with like when you expect your team to kind of win or do really, really well, you maybe aren't as excited about it. Whereas, when you're there just to create an atmosphere, and I think kind of South American football fans are kind of crazy, but like the music and the drums and all that kind of come with it. It's just kind of part of the way that they kind of digest football, I suppose, or however you might want to say it. So yeah, I think it's probably, I mean, Kiwis are so, like, one of the things I hate about going to rugby games is like Kiwis are so kind of staunch and they kind of don't get into it. And so like you kind of like, unless there's actually like a big move and there's a try about to be scored, like people sit there like genuinely quite absorbed in the game, but they don't kind of react to it at all. And so like it is really quiet, and I find that quite hard being a kind of Premier League football fan, and kind of every game there it's just like fans screaming and singing the whole time. So it's interesting just how different teams kind of or different parts of the world, I guess, kind of like take on their football and how they actively engage in the game or don't. I'm
glad you said that about New Zealand, because that's one thing I found about New Zealand was that crowds always surprised me. I think we've talked about this before, particularly at rugby games. Like I remember, going to a couple of Super Rugby games, and I went to a Chiefs Highlanders game in Dunedin. That was a draw. It was very close, very tight. Like it was a draw right at the death. And basically everyone was just like, "Oh, bro, it was a draw, cool." And then they just left. I'm like, where's the atmosphere? What's going on here? But then having been to a Super Rugby game here in Sydney, and then also a Wallabies game. I feel like it's maybe just rugby crowds in general because it's a bit like, oh, we're here to cheer the rugby. Let's go.
Yeah, I think though if you go to if you go to an All Blacks game, I think it's a bit different. Like I think if it's like All Blacks versus Australia or something, it's probably really different. I think go to somewhere like Twickenham, you're probably going to get a real kind of different crowd. I think it definitely is part of the Kiwi culture. Like I remember going to a concert over here, and like the crowd just weren't into it, and it was like these American performers, and they kind of like basically had to say to the crowd like, come on, get into this. And it was quite embarrassing to be there because like you don't want to be the one that gets up and gets into it because then like you're the one weirdo in the entire crowd. So there is definitely a Kiwi mentality to that. Like we don't want to show too much emotion. It's just maybe it's kind of like an English colonial thing or whatever, I don't know.
It's definitely like the one thing I will say about from an Australian perspective of soccer/football, whatever you want to call it, is that I definitely think we don't really get that culture because at every Matildas game I went to, and I've been to a couple of Socceroos games in the past, we have like one chant and then we just don't develop from there. And I will say like the atmosphere built like from, you know, the opening Matildas game to then a round of 16 and then that semi-final, you know, against England. I will say, you know, maybe the best moment of atmosphere I experienced at the World Cup was when Sam Kerr got that goal to tie it up in that semi-final for 8 glorious minutes. It looked like we were on a chance of making the final before we shat the bed. But I mean, I was right behind the goal where she scored it, and just the insane level. I don't think I've ever been in a sporting game and experienced that level of euphoria ever. Like that was just insane. But then
football's a bit like that, though. Yeah. Football is kind of because it is real kind of moments, like in a standard. And
when you score a goal
game,
like that too, like it's like fuck.
yeah, totally. But I think kind of like rugby is also like a normal game of rugby. There might be like 2 or 3 or 4 tries, so you have kind of those moments. But then you have penalties and stuff as well. So there's often like lots of kind of scoring moments. Whereas I think in football, like a standard game of football, you know, like if you have 4 goals across a game, that's a lot. So like there is like a real release of emotion when you watch a game of football because the actual goals don't come thick and fast as a general rule.
Yeah, very, very true. That's a good point. We did have a very cocky English supporter near us in that semi-final. So when they scored those last, we wanted to slap him down. But I will say that the fun one actually was the round of 16 game between the Netherlands and South Africa. That ultimately should have been the USA. So they had, of course, scheduled that game for midday on a Sunday for the TV audiences, assuming the US would top the group. So I will say there were more American fans at that game than there were South Africans. And Americans beat Americans. They still showed up in their Team USA gear, and which was great. But that was the beauty of sort of all the later stages of the games because, you know, I met several American fans at the quarters, the semis. You know, they were sad that they were out, but they were still like, we've traveled here from the US. We're going to wear our American gear. We don't care. I met some Canadians at the final. They were in their Team Canada gear. Like, yeah, you know, suck. We got eliminated in the group, but we're still here. And that's one thing that I think kind of surprised me. And this is, again, no disrespect to a women's World Cup. Obviously, with each edition, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's sort of, you know, being on par with the men's World Cup. But I wasn't sure, do people travel for the Women's World Cup? Do people come from the other side of the world for this like they do with the men's? And clearly they do because it was, you know, just that level of atmosphere. And you would see every, you know, so many different countries, people wearing different jerseys and all that sort of stuff at you know, particularly the final as well. So I don't know if you saw that in New Zealand, that you sort of saw that. Obviously, America was based there, so you probably would have had a few more Americans in your part of the world. But yeah, I just loved seeing those traveling fans.
I think probably it's hard to tell because I think a lot of people used it as an opportunity, like people who have moved over here from whatever country used it as an opportunity to kind of like my impression from kind of that loud Swedish fan, my impression from kind of the people she was with was that she had married a Kiwi or something, like she was over here, like she hadn't traveled from Sweden to watch that. I also think it's quite interesting to look at like where the strength lies in women's football, and a lot of it is in North America. So I think probably there were quite a few people traveled from USA and Canada especially because that's where football's really strong, and probably Netherlands because that's another team that's really strong, and maybe Sweden, I don't know. But I think probably like your South Americans probably didn't travel because none of their teams are super competitive at the moment. But it's even this tournament, it looks like that's starting to change, and maybe you're going to see the more traditional kind of European, South American teams start to evolve as well. So I didn't get the impression there were a huge amount of tourists in the country to come and watch the football, but it's hard to tell. And again, like I say, because I was in a city where it wasn't a host city, that was really hard to evaluate. And I mean, when I was in Hamilton for the game, there were just like Argentinian fans everywhere, but they could have been, I mean, Auckland's only an hour and a half's drive from Hamilton, so they could have easily just been all the Argentinians who live in Auckland had gotten a car.
Yeah,
and
I didn't know
down.
how many Colombians live in Sydney until this World Cup. So
yeah, well, I mean, I used to work with a Colombian, and she was really passionate about her country and about football. And if Colombia had been playing over here, she would have absolutely have been there. So I felt a bit sorry for her actually, because she was part Colombian, part Costa Rican, so both teams were playing over in Australia, not in New Zealand, which was a bit of a shame.
I work very closely with the Swede, and I think the only time he got to see them was in the third place playoff here in Australia.
Yeah,
so which I mean, I got to ask just on the result side of things outside of New Zealand. I know you're a bit of an English fan, so how did you feel about the final? I mean, England once again not quite bringing it home. It's not coming home. Were you disappointed?
Oh, I mean, not really. I mean, I was pretty agnostic about the actual results, to be honest. Like, I didn't feel like there's a lot right. And I mean, that's not even a Women's World Cup thing. Like, I really don't care all that much about international football, to be honest. Like, I guess I am an England fan because I've got family from England and was brought up following England, but I don't really care all that much. I'm definitely more focused on the club I support as opposed to the country I support. So, I mean, given a choice, I would have liked to have seen England win, but I wasn't like crying devastated that they lost, and they just didn't play well enough in that final to deserve it. So, like, you can't really complain when you don't turn up at the final. That's just the way it goes.
Was there any sort of slight cheering from the Kiwis for the Matildas? I mean, that took over here in Australia. That was insane.
Yeah, no, there definitely was. And I think kind of like, even if you look at like when the football ferns got knocked out, they kind of asked our coach, like, who should we be supporting now? And she's like, definitely Australia. So I definitely think there was. I think if you guys had actually gone on and won it, we probably wouldn't have been happy about that. That would have been probably a step too far to see Aussie actually win it.
We would have got a public holiday and you guys would have been shitty.
We just would have never heard the end of it. But yeah, I think they definitely, and I mean, like, to be honest, like, because I was just thinking today, like, what are the games I really enjoyed? And almost all of them were ones that Aussie were in. Like, not all of them Aussie won. Like, I thought that Nigeria Australia game was awesome, as like as a neutral-ish supporter. But I thought the Australia Canada game was fantastic. Like, it was just such a kind of like, you thought this was going to be this real close match, and then it just ended up being a bit of a trouncing. I thought that the semi was actually a really high quality game. So yeah, there was that one as well, and then I think there was another. Was it one of the other knockout games Aussie were in? Was really good.
France one with the penalties that basically.
Yeah. I mean, that was a good game. That was a good game too. I think the only one I didn't actually watch was the Denmark one.
It wasn't. It was fine.
Intended to, but fell asleep.
It was really interesting with the Nigerian game. I was actually seeing Oppenheimer at the time, so I was kind of like sneakily looking at the score, and I saw it at one point. Oh yeah, we're winning, and then next minute I look at 3-1. I'm like, what the fuck happened? And then the Canada game, because obviously my mixed allegiances. Of course, I wanted Australia to win, but like deep down, I wanted Canada to top the group, because that way I would have at least get to see Canada play once, because I had tickets to that round of 16 game. Whereas, I was confident Australia could, go through the other way. But I was in a bar filled with Canadians that night. So that was quite an interesting one there. World Cup, though, is about to start in about a week, is the Rugby World Cup, the Men's Rugby World Cup, the one that I think this is the one New Zealand cares about the most. And at the time of recording this, Nick, All Blacks have suffered the biggest defeat in All Blacks history to South Africa. And now, to put this into context, you guys lost by 28 points, if I'm not mistaken. The Wallabies, I think, we've lost like 8 in a row now or something like that. But, we lose by that every week at the moment at this point. But, I guess that just shows how good you are, that a 28-point loss is your biggest ever. But is it panic stations right now, Nick? Right now, the All Blacks, New Zealand are about to blow up because you get beaten by 28 points by the Springboks a week and a half out from the World Cup?
Well, I think the media would love to make it a big deal, like that. Like it was literally the leading story on the 6 o'clock news on Sunday night that the All Blacks lost. It's like, to me, I find it hard to get too worried about it because, like 2 weeks out from the World Cup starting, you can't tell me these guys were like putting in full on tackles because like they don't want to get injured like in a game that doesn't matter 2 weeks before the World Cup starts. So like if those guys were giving it everything they've got, I'd be stunned. It's a kickabout. It's like a friendly, like, and that's the thing. Like rugby doesn't really have friendlies, like football does. Like you play friendlies against teams all the time, whereas rugby, like, kind of every game's competitive. So seeing this thing that's actually just really a kickabout for these guys to get some game time as opposed to actually, and we never want to lose to the Springboks. They've traditionally kind of been them and Australia, kind of been the two teams that we just never want to lose to. So yeah, I mean, who knows? I think probably. New Zealand probably want to try and avoid the Springboks at all costs until we absolutely have to, like a final. And I think the way that things work out is that if we lose the opening game against France, we're probably going to get the Springboks in the quarterfinals, just the way that the draw goes. So from that perspective, it's a bit nervy because France look good. And, like at home, opening game of the World Cup, you could easily see the All Blacks losing that one. And then all of a sudden we're faced with, after weeks of playing Uruguay and Namibia, we end up having to take on the Springboks. Like, that's not great. And I think most Kiwis probably, like, we desperately want to win the World Cup, but we definitely don't want to finish outside the semi-finals. And that's only ever happened once to the All Blacks. So I think probably there is a little bit of nerves, but I would probably tell people not to be too stressed about it. I think what's really interesting is that opening game against France. The All Blacks are the only team to have never, ever lost a pool game. Like, we've never lost a pool match in Rugby World Cup history. And this is probably the most likely time it would ever happen. So it's really interesting to me because I actually think like one of the most important games of the entire World Cup is the first one, because it's probably going to set the trajectory for the rest of it. Like every time this happens though, like it's like we hear all this shit basically that, like the Northern Hemisphere teams are going to own it this time round. And like, it's never happened. Like England won it once, in extra time. Like,
don't bring that up.
Like, yeah. Australia could have won
years.
that. So it's not like England were dominant in that World Cup. They were a good team, don't get me wrong. But, like, it's not like there's ever been this period of Wilkinson dominance. So, like, I don't know. I think the rubber hits the road when the games actually start, right? So I think probably let's not get ourselves too wound up about things, but that's Kiwis for you. It's interesting because I think probably like this feels like the most low key build up to a World Cup ever. Yeah. And I think there's probably a lot going on in New Zealand, right? We've just had this football World Cup. We've got a freaking election in a month's time or 6 weeks time. Like, I think and there's a cricket World Cup. We've just had a netball World Cup. I think kind of it's like this thing's just kind of been lost in the shuffle a little bit. So I think probably if New Zealand really shit the bed and it all goes wrong, I think it's probably the one time we'll probably get away with it, to be honest.
It's so fascinating you say that because I remember being there 4 years ago and, getting excited for it. And it was a pretty big-ish deal. I mean, I remember being in a bar for that. You guys' opening game was against the Springboks at that World Cup 4 years ago. I remember that vividly because the Stags in the Mitre 10 Cup at the time had won in like 5 years and we finally won a game. So we were in a bar with like fucking half drunken Mitre 10 Cup players. They'd won a game in 5 years watching the All Blacks beat. That was a great night. But the semi-finals, I think you guys, did you not get eliminated in the semi-finals?
Yeah. England beat us in the semis. Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, it's fascinating to think that, you're straight away up against France, who, hosting the World Cup. Well, did they not host a World Cup only recently, France? I feel like they just had a Rugby World Cup.
Well, the thing is, the Northern Hemisphere ones, often they end up being kind of co-hosted.
Right.
So, like, even if it's often like France and Wales and England, like, all hosting it together. And it's like, so, I think probably 2015 was an England World Cup, but there might have been some games.
Maybe? I know.
I think 7. Yeah, I think 2007. I think I think it was hosted technically by France, but
they did. France 2007. They hosted it. Yeah,
because that's the one that the All Blacks got knocked out in the quarterfinals. Like France lost one of their pool games, and so ended up basically coming second in their group, which was a bit of a surprise. We met them in the quarterfinals, which was in Cardiff. Like, so the host team were playing a knockout game not in their own country.
Strange.
Yeah, it was very odd. So yeah, I remember that one. So yeah.
Because it's weird just looking at the hosting, because I keep forgetting Australia's hosting it in 2027. We only had it in 2003, and only since like yesterday we had it. So I went to a game. I remember that vividly. And then the US, of course, in 2031, which will be interesting. I mean, I think Australia are worried that we're not even going to make it out of the group this rate. I mean, it's all like, oh, Eddie Jones, yay, he's back, and we haven't fucking won a game since he started coaching it. I went to the Wallabies. Wallabies Argentina game. It was embarrassing. We lost at the death. I'm like, what the hell? We lose Argentina now? What's going on?
Well, somebody needs to check in on Eddie. I don't think he's all right. There's something, he's gone seriously kind of like off the deep end and like conspiratorial, and like I think kind of like
we coach England.
It's all very strange. Like journalists asking him very mundane questions, and he thinks they're after him. It's like it's all very odd. But I hope you guys do all right, because I've drawn you in one of our work sweepstakes. I've got Australia, so I really hope you guys do all right, and I might make some money off it.
Well, I got England in the work sweep for the Women's World Cup, so I won $50. So
okay,
but it's actually. Did you know they did a movie on Eddie Jones that Tamara Morrison played him? When Japan beat South Africa, they did a movie.
That's right. Yeah.
I thought that was incredibly weird. I would like to see it. It's you mentioned what's really strange, because like the Cricket World Cup is generally early in the year, right? They usually do that in like March, April, but for some reason it's late in the year. So the Rugby World Cup actually overlaps with the Cricket World Cup. We've got a Basketball World Cup on at the moment as well, which I don't know how that's getting. Like it's the World Cup part of the year. Let's just put them all on at the same time. I know we're a bit far away from the cricket one. We'll probably get you on before that, but I mean, obviously the wounds of 2019 are probably still there. But I mean, you had a pretty successful last 4 years. New Zealand, you won the Test World Championship, and you did all right. I mean, is there a bit more confidence that because you deserve it. You deserve a Cricket World Cup. You deserve 2019. You won that World Cup. Everyone knows that.
Yeah, let's not go there again. But we did lose to the United Arab Emirates in cricket like last week. So I don't think we're likely to do particularly. I mean, you never know, and that's one of the things I quite like about cricket, is that weird shit often happens in cricket. And I think one of the things I really struggle with cricket is that it's so dependent on pitches, and if you're playing on pitches that your team is used to, you tend to do better. And so you'd put a lot of money, I think, on India or Pakistan winning this one, because it's in their part of the world. They know what the pitches are like, and so I really hard, because it's not like rugby or football where the pitch is basically the same anywhere. It's such a the location is such an important part of cricket, but that's the thing. You just never know what's going to happen on the day. And I hope, it's interesting with the Rugby World Cup is that like France is our kind of hoodoo team for the All Blacks. Like we often end up getting knocked out by France for whatever reason. And we're kind of India's hoodoo team. We seem to knock them out of World Cups quite often. Because I remember we got into that. Was it the 2019? Yeah, it was the 2019 final we got into on some kind of weird Duckworth-Lewis. The game went over 2 days, like weird shit.
That, yeah.
So even getting into the final was a bit odd. So yeah, you just never know what might happen. So yeah, keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's the weird thing about the Cricket World Cup, because they change the format every bloody year. I think this time around it's everybody plays everybody in the group, and then just the top 4 teams go through to the semi-finals. I mean, bring back the days when I know the Netherlands are in it this year, but bring back the days like Canada and the US are playing, and you got 32 teams. Make it like a soccer World Cup. Just fucking do it. The basketball do it that way, but anyway.
Well, I kind of grew up on memories of the 1992 Cricket World Cup, which we co-hosted, and that was a similar format, right? It was I think it was only 8 teams or 10 teams or something. 10,
Zimbabwe,
I think, wasn't it?
back then was a fresh team. Zimbabwe. Yeah, I remember that. We had a game.
And everyone had those kind of everyone had those same shirts with the rainbow shoulders.
Retro. They've come back. They're really nice jerseys. Those ones. That's right.
And I think we remember that one because I think it was the first time maybe New Zealand made the semi-finals, and then we got beaten by Pakistan in the semi-final. But
Pakistan won it. They beat England in the final, didn't they? From memory, was that right?
Yeah,
the MCG. Yeah.
And so I remember that being like really cool format in terms of everyone plays everyone, and then you have semi-finals. But yeah, you're right. Cricket can never decide what the hell they're doing. Like, there's no win in West Indies this year, eh? Like they didn't make it.
They got eliminated. Yeah, they got because they had
crazy.
this weird qualifying tournament. That's right. Yeah. But I mean, we'll say that there's every chance, Nick, that that cricket could be an Olympic sport in 2028. The IOC are going to be choosing their sports in about a month for 2028, and cricket's on the short list. So I don't. If it doesn't make LA, I think cricket will be at Brisbane 2032. So I reckon we will have cricket in the Olympics very soon. Final question without notice. Did you see Barbie and Oppenheimer? Did you get them behind the Barbenheimer trend? And which do you think was better if you saw both?
I was never going to go and see Barbie. It was just never one of those. I mean, look, my windows of opportunity to go and see movies these days are a lot smaller than they used to be. So I have to be a bit more choosy. But I actually saw Oppenheimer only a few days ago, and I thought it was good. I didn't think it was necessarily something you needed to see on the big screen. I think we all got a bit kind of, apart from the obvious one scene of the bomb test, I think we all got a bit tricked into feeling like you have to see that on a big screen. I really wish Christopher Nolan would sort out his kind of sound design.
Oh my God, yes, right. You can't hear anyone, can you?
Just can't hear anything. No. And I remember I'm still burnt from Tenet or whatever it was called, like going to like the worst film I've ever seen in a movie theater, and that is saying something. Like it was, and not necessarily because it was a bad movie. It was just I couldn't hear what the hell was going on.
That was COVID though. We all were excited to see a movie, so movie, yay!
Yeah. But no, I thought Oppenheimer was good. I think it was one of those great movies where you're just like, there's so many like famous actors in it. You're like, there's that guy and that guy and that guy, and like people turning up for like two scenes that you've seen on a great TV show, and you're like, oh my God, there they are. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, in terms of my favorite movie of the year so far, it's been a bit of a strange year for movies, but
nothing's really stood out. I saw Jurassic Park the other day on the big screen, its 30th anniversary. I'm like, oh, that's a good movie. That'll do well.
Yeah, I remember seeing that like after COVID, before movies started coming out again, and like because we got out of lockdown before anyone else, and so they were showing old movies. So I went and saw Jurassic Park in 2020 on the big screen, and I saw all three Lord of the Rings on the big screen again, which was just
but they just
awesome.
permanently play in New Zealand, don't they? That's just like,
yeah, pretty much. You just walk in and there's something. One of them's on.
I think that was that period in Canada, and I finally got to see Back to the Future on the big screen. And I think I saw the Santa Claus because I love that movie. But yeah, that's a good. Like, what the best one this year? I saw Gran Turismo last week. That was just what you would expect it to be.
Yeah.
Nothing amazing. I like The Flash. I'm one of the few people.
I really enjoyed that actually. I think it was one of the better kind of. I get confused what's in the DCEU and what's not now, but I thought it was good. I think I think people try and pick apart particular scenes of CGI and stuff, but like other than that, I thought it was pretty good. I thought Guardians 3 was good. It was kind of unexpected.
It was fine.
I need to see Mission Impossible again because I'm not entirely. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but I think it was probably it had gotten so hyped up in my head that it was going to be this good, and then I was like, oh yeah, it was good, but maybe, and it wasn't a full story, of course. Like it's a part 1 of 2, so that makes it hard. But I think I really want to see it again just because, like, just to try and evaluate exactly what I think of it.
You need to hang out with Colin. I think he's seen it about 30 times since we started this interview, Nick.
Just lives at the movie theater.
That man, like, you think you have it hard having one kid. He's got like 80 kids, but he somehow can like ditch them all the time to go see Tom Cruise on the big screen. So Nick, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. We won't have a celebratory kiss after this.
Oh, well, and if we do, there will be consent. There will be lots of consent, Nick. You've heard from Jimmy and Nick today, so why not hear from another show of ours? The Oz Network, of course, is a show that falls under the Brink umbrella of the big network of shows that we do produce out there. Myself and Colin generally host that one. A few other hosts will come on board with that as well, of course. Colin and I recently did an episode on the television show 24. We're doing a great coverage on that as we go over every single episode in the history of the show. And we got talking about a certain country in Africa that could have gone a different way had we allowed it. But let's just say it turned out a little bit like this.
It was NASCAR great Carl Edwards.
That was funny. You're on fire today. But like, I just love that line because like, You know, like I don't know, the Prime Minister of Swaziland's calling up, like, Mr. President, good job. Oh, the President of Lesotho. There you go. Oh, freaking Johnny Depp. Hello, Johnny Depp. Hang on a minute. Sorry, Mr. Prime Minister of England. I've got Johnny Depp on the line. Don't mind me. Hello, Johnny Depp. Thanks for congratulating me. Like, also, like, I get this is kind of a thing, like global politicians will call each other, but like it's much more of a Twitter thing now, isn't it? Like people will tweet out, but like, is this the arrogance of America that after stopping a terrorist attack, they're expecting phone calls? And is this like
they did stop like 5 terrorist attacks today.
Right, okay, fair point. But like, I'm not going to name countries because I'll probably get called racist, but there are other countries in the world where worse shit happens than America. If there's a genocide in Yemen, 17 mold gets. There's apparently like a freaking a coup going on right now in Nigeria, in Africa, which no one's talking about, right? Fucking Jack Bauer goes to Nigeria and like freaking stops 17 terrorist attacks, whatever. Fucking Joe Biden calling up the president of Nigeria. I'm going to look up who the president of Nigeria is because I really want to know who this person is. And like, kind of like, hey, President Joe, well done. No. Arrogance of America to be like, call me. I stopped something.
In reality,
Bazoum is the president of Nigeria. Mohammed Bazoum, I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about your politics. I don't know if you're a good guy or a bad guy. If there's a coup going on, I'm guessing some people disagree with you. But like, why on earth, like, I don't know what I'm saying. The point is, arrogant America. I love you, America. You're arrogant.
In reality, when that phone call comes in, we got the president in Nigeria online. He's like, it's pronounced Nigeria. Nigeria doesn't exist.
Joe Biden's going like Nigeria. I thought it was Nigeria, sir. They're different countries. No, they're not. Next thing you tell me there's 2 Koreas.
We got the president of Senegal on the line. You mean Sengala?
Turkmenistan's online. You mean Uzbekistan? No, Kazakhstan. How many stands are there? God damn it!
One of the stands is on the line. Oh, stand number 2 to stand number 3.
Go!
Go! It is very much. I mean, I could also imagine though, because of the conference with the Russians that was going on, that it would be bigger news around the world, and maybe they're picking this up in Nigeria. They're picking up the news. But,
flavor of the month. We've never mentioned Nigeria on this show ever.
We
More
were
than
due
1,000 episodes. We'll tick off your country bingo at home. Get a scratch map. Every country we've ever mentioned on the Oz Network, and you win a prize.
We have analytics. Can we actually see if we have any listeners there?
I mean, to be fair, do they even have the internet in Nigeria? I don't know much about the country. Like, I mean...
Oh, now you've offended all our listeners in Nigeria.
If they don't have the internet, then they're not listening, so they're not going to get offended. I mean, that's a good point.
I'm going to look up and see if we have any listeners there.
I really hope we do all of a sudden, actually. I'm a big geography man. I can download locations right now of all time of our listeners from around the world, and I'm really sincerely hoping we have a listener from Nigeria. Because if we do, I want to get you on the show. Maybe the president listens. Like, I don't know. We do not. Nigeria.
Oh.
So
how big are we in Nigeria?
Only ever had 12 listeners in the history of... I don't know if that's like this week or like in history, but our countries begin with them. We have Nepal, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nigeria, Norway. No Nigeria. That's our new goal, Colin, to crack the Nigeria market.
Can we just get like some exclusive advertisement there? Like what's like the big TV show we could buy a 30-second spot on?
Nigeria's Got Talent.
Nigeria Entertainment Tonight.
Nigeria Idol. Here we go. I can go to the Apple Podcast, all podcast Nigeria charts. So the number 1 podcast in Nigeria right now is Abdul Rahman As-Sudas, Muslim Central. The top 5 podcasts are all from a channel called Muslim Central. So, do you know much about Muslims being in the middle? I don't know.
No, I tried. This is just showing how terrible this world is. I tried to look up what the biggest TV shows were in Niger, and Google corrected me that it's Nigeria. I'm like, no, it's not.
Well, just going on some of their other episodes, at number 22 on the all podcast chart of Nigeria, from the Adult Film Star Network, Sick Addictions with Jocelyn Stone. Ooh, they're a bit naughty, Nigeria. They're into their Does Nigeria have an ice hockey team?
In the junior Goodwill Games, they did.
There's a Nigerian men's national fielder. It's not Nigeria, Nigeria. All right?
Look at this. Terrible Google.
I know.
They're different countries.
God damn it. Anyway, thoughts to all the people listening to Nigeria when they hear this in like 2029 or something like that.
Niger has never won a gold medal in the Olympics, but they did win a silver in Rio.
What'd they win in?
Looking it up, they won a silver in Taekwondo.
Oh, good for Nigeria. Well done. You Taekwondo
And
those people.
that was their first medal since 1972 in Munich when they won a bronze in boxing.
Oh, you're saying they've actually... Well, I thought they would have never won any. Good for them. Can I get a fun fact about Nigeria? I literally know nothing about the country. If I Google it, you get a picture of a dinosaur. It's one of the hottest countries in the world. A 30-foot herbivorous dinosaur lived. They love their dinosaurs apparently in Nigeria. So Jurassic Park Dominion, Nigeria. Good for them.
Better than what we actually got.
Have we talked way too much about the country of Nigeria? Did you honestly think when
we got to get a listener?
when we started this podcast that like I'm literally going to write the synopsis of this episode is going to be welcome, this is a massive episode. The twist is here as we recap episode blah, 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 blah. I'm literally going to write Nigeria. I'm going to write it 50 times and then I'm going to end it with, and what about that twist? ? Listen now. That is the synopsis of this episode. If you are reading...
I might avoid it only because if people are only glancing at it, they may think that it's something else.
Shit. I avoided a lawsuit. Oh, that's a solid point. Good job, Colin. You saved me. You said...
Because then Max Dawson would have been right.
I'm going to write African country where we need more listeners. African country. I'm going to write that like 30 times. Oh, fuck.
I'm sure Max Dawson will still find an issue with it.
I think I told the story before about how I discovered what the N-word was accidentally as a child when I discovered what the country of Nigeria was. There was a book in my primary school library and it was like about the country of Nigeria. So my friend and I saw it and we thought it was pronounced an inappropriate way. And we were like, I don't know, 8 at the time. So we thought it was a funny word. So we kept calling each other that word, not knowing anything about it. And then one night at the kitchen table, I was eating dinner with my mum, my dad, and my sister. My sister was being annoying. I called her the N-word. I learned a history lesson that day.
Slapped.
I had no dinner, went to bed, and I was locked in my room for about a month. And that's how Ben became a racist. Seriously, that is a true story. I'm so... African. I'm just going to write African country. I don't even know. I'll word it something. It's funny. Moving on. Prominent people in America. That would have made the best of. That segment went on for way too long. It wasn't that funny. If you're listening to this episode thinking it's going to be the best of, I'm not editing all that out. Or maybe I just did. Yeah, fuck it. I did already. Why not? And a big shout out to all our listeners in Nigeria. Not sure if anybody tunes in here. I could look it up, but I haven't today. But it's a beautiful country. So I've heard. And if there's anybody listening from Nigeria who wants to invite us to do a live show in Nigeria, we'll gladly put our hands up and do it. So we thank you in advance for the invitation. Well, it's that time of the show where you get a little bit sad because we're closing it up. That's another episode of The Brink. But a big thanks to everybody for tuning in today. As I said at the top of the show, we do appreciate your support and you listening into the program. Thanks again to Jimmy. Thanks again to Nick. And thanks again to Colin for being on another show and not on this show. Couldn't be bothered showing up this week. Lazy. That's all I can say. But plenty of stuff still to come as we continue on through 2023. Hopefully we won't go as long between episodes, at least, and still bring you one at least once a month. So moving into September, plenty of stuff happening in September. So stay tuned for some exciting things coming up there. In the meantime, do all the things that you usually do at this point of the show, like, subscribe, follow us, all the great places you can follow us on. Just search for The Brink and we're there, basically. You'll be like, oh, The Brink, there you are. And then you'll be able to follow us and stay up to date with everything that is going on. I haven't said this last bit in a while because usually I've had somebody closing this out with me the last few episodes. So, lucky Ben. Until we next speak again, thanks for tuning into The Brink. And remember to Keep sucking those oranges, Hobart, and good night.